Okay, we are rolling. Hi. Thanks for coming.
Hi. Such my pleasure to be here.
How are you?
I'm really good.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How do you feel about that? You're not the person I know of you. This sort of thing wouldn't normally be in your wheelhouse because you're always like, let's just go forward.
Let's just go forward.
What's this like?
Yeah. It's, I almost drove off the road when Alan called me.
Really?
And so, it is a pretty heady experience, right? Because, and only to be, the second woman in 34 years of the award.
Crazy to think about that.
Is something, right? So hopefully it opens the doors and maybe there'll be more women who are recognized for doing their bit to build an industry.
When I heard that, that Denise Donlon was going to get this, I remember thinking to myself, she doesn't already have it? Right. Only because, really? and I am certainly biased because I got to work with you and learn from you, but I don't know who else has done what you've done in your career, and you're you're the leader people talk about. So I was like, what? She doesn't already have this at some point? And then I went, of course she doesn't, because the fucking business is stupid. And it is still run by...
Business is a bit stupid, yeah.
And you were always fighting against it the whole way. Even when you were the boss, I'm sure you had to feel that way.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? It's this whole, and the Me Too movement that's happening right now, and finally, people are speaking up and they're being less afraid to speak up and try and right the wrong so that there's, equitable workspace. But at the end of the day, when you look at the numbers of women in positions of leadership, the music business is no different from the big numbers, where it's like 6% of women CEOs on the Forbes list. 6%, right?
Yeah, that's wild.
The percentage of women on boards in Canada, 14%.
But it's so funny because...
it's a market fail.
But when I was thinking about coming up in Canadian television, with the exception of 2 years in sports, I've only ever worked in places that were run by women. So I only knew Much Music, and I knew CBC, right? And so even when I did my stuff at CNN, even though Jeff Zucker was the boss, it really was Amy Antelis. So I only knew television. I mean, CTV was run by a woman, Global was run by a woman. Right. So it's like Canada.
Well, you're a bit of an anomaly then.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
So but Canadian television was a little bit more ahead of the curve, it seemed, than the music business is even now.
Well, I think it has to. I mean, first of all, we need to have more women, more people of color, more diversity, more, embrace the human rainbow, right? Yeah. On every level, because it's only good for the business at the end of the day. I was watching, when I was writing my book, I thought, because I was talking about how we used to do a lot of media literacy programming on Much, right? We take those music videos and we'd look at them and say, okay, let's deconstruct these images. What's going on here? Racism, violence.
Too much for much.
Too much for much. And I remember we did a lot of work on gender issues, right? And the 90s was a time of real empowerment for women, right? The Spice Girls were out there, but at the same time you had to go, okay, there's a difference between choice and control. Like, are they wearing that because they want to wear that, or who's telling them that? And so I sort of fast forwarded 30 years and looked at the music videos that are out there today, and it's the same thing, right? There's a guy in a Natalie dress suit, and there are two women in their underwear. And you know what? I'm not slut shaming here. Wear what you want. Do what you want. Just make sure it's what you want and not somebody else. It's a lack of creativity. There's more double-sided dress tape, sometimes better lighting, but really nothing's changed in 30 years. Kind of astonishing.
Well, the only thing that is different is the absence of the conversation. Because I remember when I was there, especially in that last wave of the rock bands who would make videos that were, certainly they were... Sometimes it was misogyny, it was generally sexist, but it was mostly just dumb.
Right, yeah.
But I remember there were discussions and there were groups and we talked about these videos and they were either banned or otherwise. But when hip-hop showed up, nobody knew how to ban a hip-hop video.
Right.
Because it's like, how do you now tell rappers you can't talk about women this way? It was easy to do it with, British rock bands who were 75 years old.
It's true.
It changed with hip-hop and people didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, I remember... Tanya Nachev, who used to run, Rap City and worked with you on all the political stuff, which was amazing. She was so happy because she was the producer of the Power Hour, right? And it was like Motley Crue and Poisoned and Warrant, and every video had these women, with power tools and washing cars, and I used to think there was a fabric shortage in videos after a while. And she said, "Yeah, now hip hop, because hip hop's the offender now."
That's right.
But you know what? At the first of all, you need to have a platform to have a voice, and people are angry, and they're concerned about things. I remember Chuck D's famous line that hip-hop was the CNN for Black America,
That's
right?
right?
And it was. So, but once you get that power, it's not all about keeping it. It's about how you wield it, right?
Agree.
And it should not be wielded, without kindness and respect.
I agree. Denise
You know?
Donlon is here. Gave me my job in television, which I'm thankful for. Full disclosure, but also you've done so much in your career. I'm amazed at how many people still mention Much Music to me. They would have been too young to watch when I was even on it, but the brand meant so much to them. You had Rock Flash. You did the new music.
Yep.
Then you ran the ship. Tell me about those early days of Much for you and Rock Flash and what it was like being a part of that and being a woman in such a powerful spot.
Well, at the beginning, I didn't feel like I had any power at all, right? Because the people at Much Music it was so young and it was bedlam and it was chaos and, stuff was falling out of the roof and landing on your desk and it really was chaos.
And you had Jeannie Becker,
we had Jeannie
JD.
Becker and JD and Michael Williams. I mean, it was crazy in those days. And I just come off, working with bands on the road. I just come off the White Snake Slide It In tour, 84 of Europe. Yes, that and other single entendres.
What was that like?
My God, White Snake. You know what? It's funny because people always say, that must have been crazy what was going on there. But this was a professional rock tour.
Yeah.
And, guys were more likely to be walking around with a briefcase than they were a collection of bras. Like, they were about getting the job done. And we were the support act. We were the head pins. And I remember David Coverdale he looked at us one night and sort of got the cut of our jib and decided, he just said to his crew, give them whatever they need. And when I asked him about it, he said, you know what? The punters have paid for their tickets. We're going to give them the best show that we can give them. And that includes you. And it was such a breath of fresh air because we just toured with Kiss and Eddie Money and like all kinds of Quiet Riot who just tried to screw us the whole time.
Because they were insecure.
They were insecure. Yeah. So it was amazing coming from that and then into Much Music and trying to find my way. I felt like the aging spinster compared to all the youth that was there.
You were you were a baby then.
No, I wasn't. I was about 28 when I got there already.
That, by the way, that's how old I was when I got to Much Music. I was 28. But
I remember when I first met you.
Do you remember
and
that?
I do. And John Marshall from the New Music brought you in. You had your show on CFNY. And Moses had given me this edict about hiring people. He's like, no more face jewelry and piercings. We've got enough of that on the air. And then you came in. You were full of face piercings. Yeah. And you sat there and you talked to me about your snake and your mom, who is a feminist, single mom.
Yeah.
And you were so much more, this is going to sound weird, than you appeared, right? You were like the onion. Every time I asked you a question, you got more and more interesting. Every time I peeled back a piece, it was like, wow, George is really... And you were curious.
Yeah.
And for me, that was the key, right? Because you'd interview people, and why do you want to be on air? Well, I want to be famous. It's like, okay, there's the door. But you were so curious about everything, and you didn't have television at that point. But that was a snap. You could learn that, in your sleep.
I had never even thought about television. You know what's funny? I remember...
And you didn't want the job. I said, why do you want to be on that Much Music? And you said, well, actually, I'm not sure I don't, which made me want you more.
Well, I remember because I was aware of your legacy. So you were a legend to me then. And when I got to meet you, I was like, all right, this is the smartest person I'm going to be in a room with ever. And then you asked me a question that I remember. You said, who don't you like? That's on the air here now.
Huh.
And I remember thinking, that's a fucking trap. She's trying to trap me.
I wasn't trying to trap
But then
you.
I said, I'll tell you who I do like. And I answered Larissa Galka, who I really looked up to. And when I got there, you had created a space, you and David Kynes, and you had created a space that I've never experienced since, and I didn't experience before. It was this place, and it really was you, because you were the boss, and everybody I've talked to about you since talks about the time when you would stand next to the camera with your arms folded and how intimidated they were. And I remember thinking I was never intimidated by you. I actually never was, but what I always thought was, I think you genuinely want me to be great at this.
I did.
And I remember you did that for everybody. Bosses aren't like that. generally, Denise. And when I watched the way everybody felt about you, some people are scared of you. I understand why.
I can't believe that. I can't believe you said. I just thought I was a goof with the title, trying to make it up like everybody else.
Because I think most people couldn't get past the fact, most people forgot that you did this job. You bosses almost never know what it's like to be famous. They never know.
Right.
You had a unique, and Much Music at the time, and I've done lots of big shows in my life and small shows. I've never done anything where at Much Music, and again, a testament to what you created, where the audience, they knew you. Like they knew you and they took liberties with you. You understood what we went through.
Yeah.
And I could feel the whole place was better because of it. And I think Canadian television, there's no idea what it would be if it wasn't for you. I mean, Moses and John Martin created a nice thing too, Phil Switzer.
Yep, no, props to them for sure. Yep.
But what you and David Kynes did was unparalleled. That's why I was so stunned that you hadn't had this award already.
Right. Well, those were pretty marvelous times. I mean, we could just make it up as we went along.
Yeah.
And the fact that they gave me that kind of latitude to do all the social justice issue
which was
programming.
crucial to Much Music programming.
Yeah. And you know what? And the media literacy stuff and the Too Much for Much. And, the first time we took the Rascals to Sierra Leone and came back and told everybody what was going on with Blood Diamonds, it was like, how is that not me being in an editing bay cutting a Madonna special?
Right.
But the great thing about it was that we respected the audience, and the audience felt that it was their media, right? So yeah, you open the windows and you invite them in and you involve them in the programming, but it created incredible loyalty on behalf of that audience because they did feel that we weren't speaking to them, we were speaking with them, and we wanted their input. And that kind of glue between the audience and the brand, if you can call it that, I think is rare in the TV landscape now.
When you look at social media, but digital properties that have big brands, they have high valuations and they get sold or they want to get sold, the relationship with the audience isn't the same.
Right.
Do you think the culture would allow for that to happen again?
I hope it would. I don't think there's that in order for there to be a relationship, there has to be a back and forth, right? I meet you, we look at each other, we respect each other. If we get there, maybe we decide we don't and we leave. So a lot of the social media that's out there now, it's like people yelling into the abyss, right? And so they get feedback, but it's not necessarily the kind of feedback they want, unless they're building an evil tribe.
Which they might be.
Which they might be. And, there's a lot of good, too. We see, the Arab Spring and all of that, and people finally, when I get despairing about, the day after the inauguration, I was despondent and despairing.
It was grief.
It was grief. And I went out to the Women's March that day, and you're reminding me because I saw you with your pussy hat on mere moments ago. And, as we marched down the streets, it reminded me that there have never been more tools at our fingertips for everyday people to communicate and to share information and to activate and to engage and to try and change what you want to change. And that's a powerful thing. I think at this point that it's used too often for things that I don't respect, but there's an element of hope in there that if we use the power correctly, we can make it better for everybody.
If Much Music was, relatively speaking, doing today what we were doing then, and you were running it through the lens of Me Too and through the lens of Time Up, how do you think?
Oh, I would love to have that conversation. Oh my God.
Me too.
I can't imagine. Let's think of who would be the right guess, right? It would be Michelle Obama, or maybe one of her daughters.
Right, Malia would be amazing.
Beyonce, great. You got to throw an Annie Lennox in there, and then maybe Tanya Tagaq or somebody, right? That would be an amazing conversation.
Remember you said something to me a long time ago, which was really interesting. We were talking about the Too Much for Muches, because I was not really that interested in censorship, and you were like, the reason why we do this stuff is it's not just to contextualize this for young girls who see themselves on TV, but it's to contextualize this for the boys that might be interested in them, to show them that they have to be a part of this conversation as well.
Yeah.
to understand that. Broadcast was important for that because everybody watched it communally.
Yeah.
So today, I think the community could use a conversation like that in a collective way.
I absolutely agree. Why don't we do in here? We could do it together.
We can live stream it in the house. We could free rent, and we can get all those people you mentioned.
Let's do it together.
Seriously. And then
No, I think that would be
and
amazing.
I'd love to watch you host a show again. That would be really good. You were great at it.
Thank you.
What was your time at Sony like?
Sony was, I mean, the crazy thing about Sony was...
She was the boss, by the way.
I was the president, the first female president of Sony Music Canada. I mean, and the only president of a country in the Sony international universe, right? So I would go to my international meetings, and there would be people from, the heads of France and Germany and Latin America and everybody around the table. And I was a rookie trying to figure the business out right from the beginning. I admit that the idea of flying business class suddenly from what we were doing at Much was very attractive. But it was also terrible timing because the moment I walked in was when, Napster had become a disruptive little Dickens and turned the industry on its head. So within a month of being at Sony, I was starting what they call transformational efficiencies, laying people off and trying to reinvent, the business as we knew it.
Which must have been hell for you.
It was hell. We made a lot of mistakes as an industry. We made, mea culpas. I mean, suing the customers is never a good idea. How is that a good idea? Dragging 12-year-olds out of the basement. Just sort of wrong. Because we thought we could legislate our way out of it, right? We were playing whack-a-mole with all the illegal file-sharing entities that were out there. But it took a while. Literally, I started there in December of 2000, 16 years before the business started to actually have an uptick. 16 years.
That's insane.
And the worst part is that, not to mention all the artists that were laid off and the employees and everything else. Yeah, there was a lot wrong with the business that needed to be, reinvented. But this golden age for artists that was sort of promised by all the do-it-yourself tools, it just never happened, right?
I remember Paul McGuinness, who's managing U2 at the time, one of the shows was saying, everybody is ripping on the labels so much, the artists.
Yeah.
He says, how do you think they're going to be treated when it's just Apple or when it's just Spotify or just one or two companies? And he said, at least now there's some competitive landscape.
Well, actually, when their main business is music.
Yeah.
When your main business, beware the bigger beast, right? Because their main business is not music. Right. You're the lost leader that gets you in the door of Best Buy to buy the fridge, which is really what they want to sell. So, and less negotiating tools there too. But for the artists, it was suddenly, we've got all these tools and we don't need the middleman and we can go direct to market. And the challenge is that they turned into hustlers, right? Because they're spending their 10,000 hours, right? Being the distribution department and the consumer complaint department. Or, here's my special edition that I'm going to wrap in a ribbon and kiss it and charge you $10 at the end of the gig. They're not focusing on the craft. They're focusing on everything around the craft. Right. And that can only be harmful to the muse at the end of the day. So you need good people around you. You really do. And whether or not that takes, this form or a new form, I don't know. But doing it all yourself, sure, go get you noticed. But after that, focus on the craft.
Well, and now that everybody's found ways to get noticed, do you think I've heard somebody say this, and I wondered what you thought about this. Have we reached peak music content?
We may have reached peak production and availability. What we haven't reached is peak communality, right? Because and there's been some efforts between the Pandoras and the Spotifys and the, on and on to try and figure out how to build community around music and how to serve you music that it thinks that you want already with all the algorithms that go with it. Right. But I think that what we don't have is the mass trusted navigator, the mass butler that we kind of need.
There's a lot of music out there.
There's a lot of music out there.
And it's nice to have people. We try it on our show in our own small way, this idea of we play songs that we like. Yeah. And that's kind of it. Yeah. We think you might like them. I know most people won't like every song I play, but I don't really worry about that. Because how else can you figure out what your tastes are unless someone plays something you don't like?
Right. Right.
Which I think is really crucial.
Yeah, it's like listening to your own echo chamber when you only watch Fox News, right?
Oh my God, right. As Drake said, what a time to be alive. The media is a fucking nightmare now.
Yeah, yeah.
And I used to always laugh because I never thought the media represented one thing. Media is just a word for a whole bunch of people working at a job. But corporate media is insane.
Yeah. No, it's so, the alternative facts and media bias, absolutely, and there are, right? Because it's all about, pundits yelling at each other with nothing to say. Makes me crazy, which is, why even in the book I wrote a lot about public broadcasting, right? Because you need people who are actually going to work with investigative journalism and entrepreneurial journalism to work in the public good, not in the profit good. And I'm not a raging, socialist here. I just believe that we've actually gone too far where profit leads too much.
Yeah.
And we as people in an engaged democracy need information we can trust from people who aren't motivated by anything other than to serve the country.
What's the key to building a good culture?
Authenticity, truth, honesty. You can't be, it's like being a good human, right? You can't walk around trying to be fake, trying to be something you're not. I mean, you can, but it's a tremendous outpouring of energy, and it's exhausting at the end of the day. So you have to try and figure out how you can be the best person you can be that's authentic to you. And do no harm, right?
Do no harm.
Hopefully, bring some good into the world. Do no harm.
You might not just be a socialist, you might be a Buddhist.
I might be a Buddhist,
You might
too.
be a Buddhist on that as well.
Not a bad thing to be.
No, I think it's okay.
Yeah.
What was the process of writing the book like for you?
It was discipline. It took 2 years. I wrote pretty well every day. My publisher came to me and said, you should write a book. And I'm like, well, of course I should write a book, said her ego. But I thought it started off being one thing. I thought they wanted a lot of bold-faced celebrity stories and salacious stories about what happened backstage on the Whitesnake tour.
Right.
But the book had a will of its own, and it really did started to write itself. So I overwrote. They wanted 500 pages. I delivered 1,200, so then we had to cut it by 2/3. I learned a lot about editing. I thought an editor was the magic person who would take the crap I wrote and turn it into, the silk purse. But as my editor said, no, Denise, that's a co-writer. I'm an editor. So I get these great comments back saying, I strongly suggest you delete this entire chapter. Or I strongly suggest you rewrite this entire chapter. So it didn't know what it wanted to be at the beginning, but then it became about, so the stories had to, in choosing what to drop, the stories had to be funny, or they had to have taught me something, or they had to be about something, feminism, humanitarianism, using your powers for good.
A lot of leadership in too. It's a great book on leadership.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think I learned so much, right? Just by being thrust into the end of the pool and told to swim. So I thought it would be fun to share that.
And I think what you did, there were people who believed in you, and then you in turn believed in others.
Yes.
Which I think was not everybody can do that, through trust. When you were trying to find a new VJ, never mind me, because I came in near the end of that, but when you were starting to find VJs, what were you looking for? Like, how do you determine, because you would have come across a million great people. I saw Rick the other day, Rick Campanelli.
Great Rick the temp, who started off as a temp. And the receptionist.
And I posted a picture of him and I on Instagram, and the response was unbelievable. And it's like Rick was this one-of-a-kind, special person that showed up on Canadian media that I think is an unparalleled force.
Yeah.
That temp.
Yep.
Even in his late 40s.
Yeah, I know. He still looks like he's 16.
Totally.
I know.
What did you see in Rick?
Well, it was partly the audience, because we were running the temp contests. Be a temp VJ, be a VJ. Because I was getting boxes of demo tapes behind my desk. And, first of all, we cast Much Music like you'd cast a movie, right? We wanted to make sure that we were sort of embracing the colors of the human rainbow. We wanted to make sure that we were reflecting the audience that we broadcast to. And that audience was Canada. And at that time, Finland and Much Music USA and all the rest of it. So we wanted to make sure that the person in Grand Prairie and the person in, Regent Park and the person in, LA or sort of, so I meant La La Land, Vancouver, saw themselves on the air.
Yeah.
So we often look for what's the gap we need. And then the other piece was, I would never hire hubris. And I would never hire ego. I mean, you have to have some ego to survive, right? But I didn't want to hire anybody who just wanted to be on air because they wanted to be famous. I hated that idea. I needed to have people who were curious and wanted to learn and had some empathy and some generosity for not only the audience, but for the artists that came in, right?
Sure.
We were so different from MTV. MTV had, their VJs were as powerful and they were crafted to be as star-like as the stars that were walking in the door. And my ideal approach was more like, no, we are the vehicle for the stars that walk in the door, and we're going to try and make as wonderful an experience as we can for them and challenge them when they need to be challenged. Sure. But also just to tear down those bridges between the star and the audience. And we were traffic cops. That's what we did.
Well, then you realize, and I certainly did that, the better you were at that, the more the audience wanted to hear from you.
That's true.
So
that's good insight.
You got all the benefits of being a star without actually having to be a star, because you just got to be the person that built the bridge to you, or the connector to those great artists. And everybody came through much at that time.
We were closing down the streets every week. Yeah. It was expensive, but, but it was awesome.
I always wondered how much you had to pay the city.
And I was such a worrier, right? I had, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up in a cold sweat thinking, the building's a smoking hole, or there was a riot, or somebody died, or whatever.
Yeah, I remember one of my very first live at Much As I hosted was Kid Rock. Kid Rock had just exploded, and you had said to me, I think it was you or somebody, no, it was you said to me, okay, we don't want him to swear on TV. And I remember looking at you going, I'm not going to tell Kid Rock not to swear. And you're like, well, someone has to. I'm like, I'm not going to tell Kid Rock not to say the F word. And then I remember watching you walk into the room and just say, listen,
buddy,
this is not what we do here. It was really funny.
I remember having that conversation with Iggy Pop, and Iggy was always the irascible one, right?
Dude, Iggy called Jeannie Becker the C word.
He did.
In an interview.
Yes, he did. And then the next time they got together, they were best of friends, right? So Iggy was doing a live I&I, and he actually took his performance out in the street. He was awesome. But I remember talking to him because we had a delay, but we didn't want to use it, right? And I remember talking to him, and he looked at me like, I'm like, Iggy, this is a live show. We're not over the watershed hour of 9 o'clock yet, and it's only 6 o'clock. It's dinner hour for the young people in Vancouver. So could you not swear? And he looked at me batting those big eyes and was like, oh, no problem, Denise. I understand totally. I totally understand it. And I had my son at the time, so I had to leave before the show was done. And by the time I got home and I turned on the TV, Iggy was like, effing and blinded every 2 seconds. I'm phoning to get the control room. Put the delay on. God damn it. Yeah.
That must be that's quite a memory. What were the other? I mean,
he's such a brat.
He really was.
He's a brat.
It was the Cowboy Junkies. It's the famous story now where your water broke and you were in labor while hosting that show.
In labor, yeah. 90-minute show.
Was there ever any part of you that thought, I can't do this show?
Well, I remember walking in and asking Nancy Oliver, because Nancy, who was head of operations there before David Kynes, she was the only mother that was there. So when I walked, I was like, it's a little kind of gushy. I'm not really sure. And she said, well, what do you think? Can you do the show? Because, we don't have anybody else. And I'm like, well, the doctor said to keep busy. I guess I can do the show. Plus, I'd already spent $40 on professional makeup and fake eyelashes because I was 190 bajillion pounds. I think I was 220 at that point. No. Anyway... yeah, so they had me behind the piano, dressed in my black shroud. I think they were trying to hide me from the audience because I was a pretty poor example of what happens when you don't practice safe sex, right, for the young people.
That's right. Hi, kids, you're 13 years old. This one's preggers.
That's right. But, once the show started, I couldn't wear my watch anymore because my wrists were so huge. That I had to time the contractions by the rundown.
Oh my
God.
God.
That was the time, about 20 minutes in, that it got a little hairy. Because, the band would be singing, Black Eyed Man, 3 minutes 45. I'm looking at the rundown. It says, promo 1 minute, 2 minute commercial, audience 1. I'm like, I'm 8 minutes apart here. That's kind of nuts.
So you're thinking about all this stuff. You're about to have a baby.
And we're back. Marco, tell me about the Trinity Sessions. How was the recording of that around that ambient mic?
It's mental. I remember hearing this story. It's mental, but it was so interesting because... And I think it actually set a really good example, because I know that when I got there, it was, she gave birth on the air,
Yeah.
So
you can handle a scrum.
Yeah. There was one day when I think Tanya wouldn't let me come into work because I was sick. And in the 5 years, Tanya was like, you're not coming in today. And that was, but I was like, but no. Because in my head,
I can do it.
Denise was in labor on you. That is the standard that I expect, that I have to live up to.
No, you were always a worker.
I was a worker,
George.
yeah,
you were a worker, and you did your research, and you enjoyed it, and you were curious. And what I loved about you taking on the social justice issue programming piece, and T, right? T was so reluctant. He didn't want to do politics at all. But once he got into it, awesome.
Yeah.
And just to have the ability to work with talent. This is such a weird word, talent, but work with people that are open to new ideas and to new adventures and ready to just go for it.
My political activism came from a punk rock place, and so I was just used to knowing what I didn't like, and I was used to knowing how to pick fights, and I knew how to protest. When I got to Much, what you guys taught me was how to listen to the entire issue and then try to communicate your point. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how to do that before. I was just so used to being like, no, fuck you.
Yeah, right.
That's all I knew.
Yeah.
And you and Tanya Notcheff were huge for all of us and all the VJs, and saying, listen, you got to be about something. That was crucial.
Got to be about something.
Yeah. I think T had the hardest job in the entire business. Mm-hmm. I think being the host of Rap City in that era.
Absolutely he did.
Because he had to go back, and he represented more than... I just had metalheads mad at me.
Right. Yeah, right. But he had cultures mad at him.
Absolutely.
Or he had to make sure that he was understanding both sides of anything.
Yeah.
But it's a gift. It really is. It was a gift to be able to, work with some of your most heralded, legendary musicians that would just come in and you got to talk to them. So, for us, it was about doing the research, doing the work, make sure you don't embarrass yourself on the air, and that, you can offer something because they're giving you their time. Now, interviews are an artificial construct. We understand that, right? Somebody's selling something off somebody's back. But at the end of the day, if you can make a connection with somebody that you deeply admire or learn something from somebody that perhaps you don't even admire, then that's what living's all about.
Yeah, especially in the music business, because we had relationships with labels, so we knew that the interview wasn't just could I ask the questions I wanted, but there was still this really interesting balance of trying to strike where you have to represent yourself, but you have to get the artists to also be able to represent themselves. And that was a very clever balance to walk. Yeah.
Well, in the early days, media's more constrained now. Even the talk show hosts, right? Jon Stewart, et cetera, who I love. It's amazing how much information we get from our comedians these days versus almost anybody else. But even those, they sit backstage and there's a pre-interview and we know what anecdote is going to be pulled out. But Jon Stewart was one of those guys who would actually have the latitude, and you had to have the courage to be able to go on that show because he was smart enough to pick you apart. And that was amazing. There was a great quote with Jon Stewart, I hope I don't misquote him, where he said that if you can't adhere to your values when the going gets tough, then they're not values, they're hobbies, right?
It's a really good quote. Yeah. It's a really good quote, yeah,
love it.
Yeah, and I think at Much we never really felt that way. But I guess, again, that came from you and David. And I suppose John taught you that. I don't know where
John just said, shoot the shit out of it. What should I do? Just shoot the shit out of it. Ha ha ha, he'd laugh.
Really?
In his British loony laugh. The first interview I ever did, I went out, and Daniel Richler was doing the new music at the time.
Yeah, that's when I first really, that's what I was of the age where I could understand what the new music was.
Right. Yeah. And I went out for my first interview, and I brought back the tape. It was with Burton Cummings, right? And Daniel would be like, whatever. And I handed him the tape, and he looked at it, and he said, where are the re-asks? And I'm like, well, what's a re-ask? Like in those days, there was no jump cuts. You would never take an artist out of context, right? You would always like play what they said they were going to play. And if you didn't have the right nod of your head or the re-ask of the question when you flipped the camera around, it would end up on the editing room floor. We just learned it, figured it out.
I liked it because at that point, the interview felt real.
Yeah.
Re-asks are the worst.
Oh, I know. You're sitting there because now you're play acting. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. You're trying to remember it, and what the hell?
Have you had to put a fire out it much? Like, what were the crazier moments?
Well, there's lots of fires. I mean, the Pride Day story. We decided to put a Pride Day float in the Pride Parade. It was one of the Gregory Hewitt, one of the assistants said, Pride Day's coming up. We should have a parade. We should put a float in there. I was like, yeah, we should. And so everyone was in. David Kynes was in. The EC dancers were in. Everybody was excited about it. And but then when I put the promo on air, Much Comes Out, I start getting death threats, right?
People would phone me. Didn't want to participate in it.
There were VJs who wouldn't do it for religious and or cultural reasons. I remember that. And I would have those big arguments in my office. But at the end of the day, I couldn't force them to do what they didn't want to do.
I was thankful they didn't, honestly, because I got to do it.
Yeah, you got to do it.
I got to do it. Because at that point, I was brand new. So it's like, you don't want to do it? Why wouldn't you want to do it?
Exactly.
And then the religious thing came up.
But the death threats were crazy. There were people like, are you the dyke that's teaching our kids to be fags? Like, how dare you? And we know where your kid goes to school, and we know where you park your car. So there were bomb threats. And I went up to see Ron Waters because I was totally rattled. And he just said, we got your back.
That was important.
I felt like I could strangle those homophobic troglodytes with my bare hands, and it was important because we could have caved, and that day, hate could have won, but that day love won. And when I look at kids, like I take my son to school and I look at kids who are out there, the first day he went to high school, to Rosedale Public School, there was goth kids over in that corner and kids playing guitar over there, and one lithe young man in a tutu pirouetting out in the green. And I just looked at it and thought, I hope that their parents were watching what we were doing, because it is about embracing and celebrating our differences, right?
Yeah. You did something else that was really, and I don't think anybody knows. I don't know if anybody knows that you did this, so I'll say it. And if you don't want me to, we can cut it out. But and you'll never. And to this point, you haven't got the credit for it. Eminem was the biggest artist in the world, and it would make sense that we, as Much Music, would be the presenting sponsor of that tour. And I remember being in the office, the environment, and you were in some meeting, and you came out and said, "We're not going to do it," and you were not going to let Much Music be the presenting sponsor of that. I think it was Dre was on the tour. Eminem was on the tour, and I remember thinking, why wouldn't we do this? This is the biggest band in the fucking world. Like, why wouldn't we do this? And you said, I'm not convinced that the way he raps about women doesn't violate our hate laws. And if the hate laws we're even thinking about them, then we in good conscience can't put our name on this because of the way he raps about women. Eminem was the biggest that had ever been. He finally surpassed the Beastie Boys, right, for record sales for a hip-hop album. And at the time, I was like, that's really brave, because the label's probably going to kill you for it or whatever. You want to go back another 20 or the 59 years since that's happened. You made the absolute right decision.
Thank you. I don't actually even remember that, to be honest.
I remember clearly, because there were people in the office going, is she crazy? And we're like, well, you can tell Denise Donlon she's crazy, maybe she is crazy, but she's doing this.
But I wouldn't have made a decision like that lightly, right?
Sure
I would have thought about it. I would have wrestled myself and, with others about it. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's all about how you wield your power. It really is. Yeah. And, you have to be, you have to personify, you have to be who you hope others will be too.
And then and to that John Stewart quote, there are no values if you can't use them there. What a pleasure to see you.
And you too, George.
I would not be, I don't want to make interviews about me at all, but I owe you a debt of gratitude. I would not have had this incredible run and blessed run if it wasn't for you. And I'm truly grateful for it.
You said yes.
Who's going to say no to you?
Thank you for that. Oh, tons of people say no to me all the time.
I'm not stupid. I don't say no to you.
Well, thank you for joining that crazy circus way back then. And you know what, George? You are using your powers for good. So I just want to say continued success to you and all that you do.